What's up? Brandon Lilly here, doing the daily Facebook question and answer. Today we were lucky enough to only get 3 questions. The reason I try to keep it to 3 is so I can really give some time to the answers. The last couple days I've gotten 6, 7, 8 questions, and it's made it difficult to really thoroughly answer the questions the way that I feel necessary. So I try to stick to 3. It's not because I'm trying to be an asshole or anything. It's just I try to give the best answer that's possible. First question today coming from Sid. The effects of poor mobility reflected on your lifting. Well, for my own lifting, mobility has been something that I've really dedicated to, and I've noticed that I've gotten better as my mobility has increased. So I'm going to talk in general as far as what you can experience if your mobility is poor. In the squat, you won't be able to get under the squat bar correctly. You'll have to take your hands way out on the bar, which will allow some dip in the chest or some looseness in the back. The tighter that you can bring your hands in, the more you're going to be able to squeeze the shoulder blades together, arching the chest, keeping your chest up in the bottom position. And then again, if it's hip mobility, you won't be able to hit depth properly. You won't be able to squat correctly. And the other thing that people overlook, Donnie Thompson's made mention of it a lot, is ankle mobility. People that have really let their ankles just become stagnant, because they don't even walk anymore. They walk 50 feet to a chair where they sit for 8 to 10 hours a day. They walk 50 feet to their car. They drive and they come home and they sit on the couch all night. So, really taking time to dedicate to shoulder mobility, hip mobility, ankle mobility, those things can make a huge difference just in the squat and being able to set up in the squat properly. And I've made mention a lot lately, if you can't start a squat properly, how do you ever hope to get to the midpoint properly and finish properly? You need to be able to do all 3, and that starts with mobility. So just simple things. I mean, people act like mobility training is some kind of revolutionary exercise. It's just stretching. It's just taking the 15 to 20 minutes, to do it. And it's crazy to me that guys will dedicate all this time and effort in the gym, all the time and effort to money to food and drugs and supplements and things like that, and they won't spend 15 minutes a day stretching. It's pretty stupid and lazy. You're just really lazy if you don't stretch. So take the time to do that, and you'll feel a lot better. You'll squat a lot better. On the bench press, some guys, they really their shoulders suck as far as their mobility, so they start doing things that are crazy. They really start trying to bench a lot wider than they should, trying to shorten the range of motion and things like that. Get a full range of motion. Do a lot of close grip work. Allow your shoulders to retract back further than they need to. Really stretch them out in the bottom. And do overhead presses. The fact that powerlifters don't do overhead presses or do heavy shoulder press work anymore, across the board is just ridiculous to me. And I think for a lot of reasons, the bench shirt curbed some of that training, because the bench shirt, pulls your shoulders into place and it keeps them steady, so they don't have to necessarily be as strong to protect themselves. The shirt does some of the work for you. So I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to be stronger, without the shirt, and then put the shirt on and be that much stronger with it. But as a raw lifter, you're definitely going to need strong shoulder support. And I do not buy into the fact that if you get too big you can't have mobility, because I know a lot of guys, a lot of bodybuilders especially, that have done tremendous things with their mobility. But also look at gymnasts. A lot of male gymnasts are dominant upper body lift. They have a huge upper body, big shoulders especially, and they're doing things on the rings, on the pommel horse, things like that are just insane to think about. But their shoulders are big and their shoulders are defined, so how can they do it with muscularity but we can't do it? Again, it just goes back to being lazy. And in the deadlift, if your hips are bad, you're just not going to be able to get down to the bar the way that you need to. You're always going to be a high hip kind of person, and you really need to be able to squat down to get as much leg drive as possible to generate speed off the floor. And that leads me right into the next question from Jay. High hip versus low hip deads. This is something that's it's kind of debatable. I've seen some really great pullers that tend to have high hips, one being Benny Magnuson with the all-time record. Some other people that really ball up and kind of keep their hips involved throughout the range of motion, Konstantin Konstantinovs. So, it's just going to be there to me. So many people try to pack everything into, oh, this is the right way or this is the right way. That's bullshit. There's a right way for you, and you have to determine what that is. I tend to believe that more people would benefit from leg drive, which would tell me to keep the hips low. But if you see somebody that's got a dominant, strong back, and they can get in a good pulling position where they use their legs just enough to get the bar above their knees, and then they stiff leg it, but they're using their strong back to finish, and they're not having any issues, why would I deter them from that? I mean, I'm not going to look at Benny Magnuson, and actually we had this discussion in Tasmania. I'm not going to look at him and tell him that his deadlift form is wrong. He's pulled 460 kilos, so how can I tell him that what he's doing doesn't work, So really, it all goes back to what you prefer. And if the rule of thumb for people, I just wrote about this in an article today. I tell people to do whatever they do naturally. Don't try to change anything from the beginning. Just do what you do naturally, and then we'll gradually tweak that as we go along. There's not going to be these big radical changes and trying to stuff you into a mold. I think that's the worst thing that a coach can do, because their body is doing what it wants to do. Whether that's a round back or a straight back or a high hip or a low hip, their body is doing what it feels comfortable doing. So why am I going to take that and change that all the way around? Stick with what the body wants to do and just change it slightly and subtly. You don't even have to make changes right away. Let the lifter work for a little while and see where the deficiencies start to show up, and then start strengthening those deficiencies and see if the form changes on its own. It's something that I've come to watch. Say somebody is a high hip puller, well, then you start dedicating them to training their quads and their hamstrings and their glutes on their squat day. Well, those muscles get stronger, and they naturally start sinking their hips lower because they have more leg power. They can actually use their legs to drive. So if I had sat over top of them and just hounded them to lower your hips, lower your hips, lower your hips, they would have never seen the results that they saw from actually getting stronger, then coming back and making the changes on their own. So try both ways, see where you feel comfortable, and run with it. Last question comes from Javier, my man out in Cali. He says, sumo versus conventional, and why did I choose conventional over sumo? Well, as I've stated before, I pulled 785 sumo in a meet, and I pulled 815 conventional. So it's not really like I chose one over the other. It's that the other chose me. Conventional chose me. I am not very good sumo. It's actually kind of like a hybrid looking sumo conventional pull, and I'm not very technical with it. It's just my legs are a little bit wider, so we call it a sumo, but I'm actually doing a conventional deadlift with wide legs. But what I've also said, for most sumo lifters that I've ever known, they take to it relatively quickly. When they do the movement, they're actually very comfortable with it. Their form is pretty good from the get-go. They don't need a lot of change in their form to become good sumo pullers. So I've never really seen anybody that struggled with the sumo early on that went on to become a great sumo puller. It's just one of those things that you're either kind of good at or you're not, in my experience. Now, somebody's probably going to comment on here and say, well, I know so-and-so that trained sumo for 7 years and he sucked, and then finally he set a world record. That may be the case. He's the exception to the rule that I've seen. I've never seen somebody really struggle with their form because it's such a technical lift. It's one of those things you just either kind of have a knack for it or you don't. So I was a guy that was trying to force it, and it just wasn't working for me. So I went back to the conventional. I was a high hip puller, almost a stiff leg at times. And then what I started doing is exactly what I mentioned before. I started dedicating to squatting narrow. I started dedicating to actually squatting deep. And what I noticed was my leg drive became very, very strong. I started doing a lot of leg press, and I didn't do that bullshit where you load it up with 1,000,000 pounds and do 6-inch range of motion. I was using 400 to 500 pounds and I was doing very, very slow, controlled, explosive. I was taking it down slow and exploding up. And what I noticed was my quads just started growing, and I was really feeling explosive in the deadlift as well. I was feeling like I could actually jump with the bar off the floor. And naturally, as I started filming myself from the side, my hips started coming lower and lower and lower because my legs were no longer a weakness. My back was actually trying to do the work that my legs should have been doing for a long time. But once I strengthened my legs to be on par with my back, they started working together. So that's why I say the conventional chose me, because it works well with my body. Like I said, I could have probably dedicated more time to the sumo, but for what? It was never easy. It was never showing me the results that I was, expecting. I was having to work super, super hard just to gain a pound with it, when I can do the conventional, do the same amount of work, and I can always progress. In the sumo, it was hit or miss. If I got just a little bit forward, I would miss the lift. If I didn't push my feet out hard enough, I would miss the lift. If I didn't sit back far enough, I would miss the lift. The conventional, for me anyway, is just more of a brute lift. You just bend down, you pick it up, and you stand up with it. So that's why I chose conventional over sumo. Maybe if you're trying sumo or somebody's telling you to try sumo and it's just not coming, you need to realize that it's not coming for a reason. Your body doesn't want to do it. And maybe you should switch back to conventional. I've actually had a female recently that was she was pulling in the low 200s sumo, and it was not clicking for her. She went back to conventional, dropped below 200 pounds for a little bit, and then shot straight up to 270 pounds for a PR, a huge PR. So sometimes you have to step back to move forward again, and that's exactly what I did in my training. That's what a lot of my trainees have done, and I think that's what you need to do for yourself. If you're forcing yourself to pull sumo, just realize that it may not come, and go back to conventional and just dedicate to getting stronger. So thank you guys for the questions. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and we'll do it again. Thanks for tuning in. Later.